with you guys a brief word on baptism. So this will be the first baptisms we do as a church, and we're really excited about that. But for you as a believer, as a follower of Jesus, if you have not made the decision to be baptized into the family of God, we want to invite you to do that. If you've come to faith as an adult, as been following Jesus, maybe you were baptized when you were a kid, but as you've become an adult, the faith has become your own. We want to encourage you to take the step of faith towards baptism and respond to Jesus in that way and take part in his death and his resurrection and to this integration into God's family. Amen? Awesome. So my wife and I constantly have disagreements about who's in what movie and what actors where, right? So the notorious mix-up my wife has is confusing the guy who played Yondu in Guardians of the Galaxy, Michael Rooker, with Woody Harrelson, right? She's constantly conflating the two and doesn't know which one's which. And to be fair, if you look up images of them, they're kind of close. I don't think that much. We disagree about that very much, but we kind of disagree about which one's which, right? And for some reason, my wife is always convinced somehow that Bill Murray passed away. And I think it's maybe because she's conflating what happened in the movie Zombieland and what actually happened in real life. And then she conflates him with Robin Williams, right? And so it's not just like, no, honey, he's not. There's this passionate disagreement. He's alive. I can prove it, right? And so what settles the debate? Google it, right? That's what settles the debate there and then is we find out who was in the movie, when it was made, how it was made, right? We Google it, and then that is the tell-all, right? And then there's the moment for the person who was right was like, huh? See? Woody Harrelson, right? Or Bill Murray is still alive, or whatever it is. And so in our day and age, we have the world at the tip of our fingers, that there's information available all the time. You could literally Google anything and something will come up. Some hits will arise for you. Now, any answer to any question can simply be discovered by Googling it. But brothers and sisters, there's a difference between information and wisdom. There's a difference between information and wisdom. I can look up on YouTube right now how to rebuild a vehicle, right? But I don't have the wisdom of rebuilding a vehicle. I may be able to tell you parts and pieces and all the steps you need to take, but it's a whole different thing to be able to do something like that, right? I can watch all sort of informational videos about how a woman gives birth, but listen, I don't have the wisdom of knowing what that's actually like, right? How that actually is for a person. I can tell you all the psychological responses, all the physical responses, right? But until that's you, until you're actually living it out, there is this chasm between information and between wisdom, because information is everywhere, but wisdom is truly hard to find. I love what in Proverbs it says, Proverbs chapter 1, it says this: out in the open, wisdom calls aloud. She raises her voice in the public square. On top of the wall, she cries out. At the city gate, she makes her speech. How long will you who are simple love your simple ways? How long will mockers delight in mockery and fools hate knowledge? Repent at my rebuke. Then I will pour my thoughts to you. I will make known to you my teachings. But since you refuse to listen when I call, no one pays attention. When I stretch out my hand, since you disregard all my advice and do not accept my rebuke, I will in turn laugh when disaster strikes you. I will mock when calamity overtakes you. When calamity overtakes you in a storm, when disaster sweeps over like a whirlwind, when distress and trouble overwhelm you. Then you will call to me, and I will not answer. Then you will look for me, but you will not find me. Since they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord, since they would not accept my advice and spurn my rebuke, they will eat the fruit of their ways and be filled with the fruit of their schemes. For the waywardness of the simple will kill them, and the complacency of fools will destroy them. But whoever listens to me will live in safety and be at ease without fear of harm. What this personified wisdom is, as Lady Wisdom in the Proverbs is saying, is that wisdom is available for everybody to grasp, for everybody to reach out for everybody to have. But the reality is we don't want wisdom. Specifically, we don't want God's wisdom. We want our own. And when we want wisdom, it's usually when it's far too late. after the decisions have already been made, after you've already journeyed down the road far enough that it's too late to turn around at that point, that we are reaping the fruit of what we have sown into our lives. Brothers and sisters, as we survey our world, what we do not need more of is an influx of information. We are drowning in information. There's information available to us always. What we do not need is more talking heads sharing curated statistics. What we need, brothers and sisters, are humble, loving people embodying the wisdom of God. This is what we need in our cultural moment. Now, we know that wisdom is not information, but this begs the question, then what is wisdom? Wisdom is an attribute of God woven into the fabric of the universe that is available for anyone who seeks to possess it. Wisdom is the ability to live in such a way that you bring forth what God defines as good in the midst of a chaotic and complex world. Let me say it again. Wisdom is the ability to live in such a way that you bring forth what God defines as good in the midst of a chaotic and complex world. It is by wisdom that God laid the foundations of the earth. Look what the proverb says in Proverbs chapter 3. By wisdom the Lord laid the earth's foundations. By understanding he set the heavens in place. And by his knowledge the watery depths were divided, and the clouds let drop their dew. Wisdom, the source of wisdom is God himself. Wisdom and God are not disconnected. Wisdom is found in the person of God and who he is. He is the source of wisdom. So for us to embark on this pursuit of wisdom, it first must begin with our relationship with God. This is why the proverb said, Proverbs 9, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of what? Wisdom. And knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. Brothers and sisters, fear of the Lord is the fundamental understanding of our relationship with God. It is a respect for who he is and what he says is good and what he says is evil. To be a follower of Jesus, it first begins into this pursuit of wisdom is with fear of the Lord. Now, what I don't want you thinking is that kind of fear is the shuddering fear of a God who's angry with his thunderbolt and his hammer ready to smash us who have disobeyed. That is not the biblical imagery here. This idea of fear is reverence, respect, awe, and wonder of who God is. And to begin down the path of wisdom is to first come to the understanding of who God is. And to receive and accept what he says is good and what he says is evil. To receive and accept his words as truth. There was a famous pastor who was visiting another influential pastor in the 90s by the name of Jimmy Baker, who had been in jail because he'd been convicted of fraud and was found out of having an affair. And as this pastor was meeting with him, he asked him, brother, when did you stop loving Jesus? Like, where did it all go wrong for you? And it is said that Jimmy Baker responded, I never stopped loving Jesus. I stopped fearing God. He said, my love for him never went anywhere, but I stopped fearing the reality of who God is. The things he says are right and wrong. I cared much for Jesus, but I did not revere him. I did not respect him. I did not take caution to his word. For us to experience wisdom, it is found first in the fear of the Lord. Isaiah 33 says this, he will be a sure foundation for your times, a rich store of salvation and wisdom and knowledge. The fear of the Lord is the key to this treasure. So what Isaiah is saying here is the key to unlock the treasure that is God's wisdom is the fear of the Lord. It's reverence of him. And this idea is repeated over and over and over again in the Proverbs, and not just there, but all throughout the scriptures. But before we dive into what James specifically has for us this morning in regards to wisdom, I want us to see this wisdom experienced through the garden narrative. So Adam and Eve are enjoying life in the garden with God. They are in the midst of Eden, enjoying the fullness of who he is. But the scriptures tell us in Eden there are two trees. There is the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And both trees reside at the center of the garden. Notice Genesis 2 says this, the Lord took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to take care of it. And the Lord commanded the man, you are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. When you eat of it, you will certainly die. Two important things I want to say there. How many trees is he allowed to eat from? All of them, except one. Every single tree he can get his hands on, he can have, all except for one. And two, notice, God doesn't say, for when you eat it, I will kill you, but he says, when you eat it, you will surely die. Meaning that once Adam chooses to rebel on his own, he brings in death onto God's good world. So all these trees in the garden are available, including the tree of life, for Adam and Eve to partake of, for them to eat and enjoy. And the age-old question, one that always pops up is, well, why did God put a second tree there in the first place, right? Why couldn't we just have the one tree, all good trees, no bad trees, no tricks, nothing like that, right? I love what Tim Mackey says. He says this: the reason that the tree is there in the garden is it's a powerful image of the nature of all human experience. Every good thing in my life is also matched by an equal or greater amount of opportunities to ruin it, by taking my own knowledge of good and bad. But I take it often without knowing it. I just make what I think is the right decision, and I don't recognize it has all these screwed up motives underneath. The tree of knowing good and bad represents a choice that is before us perpetually. That's why it is right next to the tree of life. It has been famously said, to love is to choose. It's to choose to love. It's to have free agency to be able to choose. And there's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because we have an opportunity to either define good and evil on our own terms or allow God to define those things for us. Here in the garden, in every days of our lives, we are faced with this choice: to use wisdom and understand good and evil as God says, or to choose it for ourselves and unleash evil on God's good world. What happens? Genesis 3 says this: now the serpent was more crafty or wise than any of the other wild animals that the Lord had made. He said to the woman, did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? Notice how the serpent is twisting God's word. He's saying, you can't have any one of these? Like, these are all some good trees. You're going to die out here starving. The woman says to the serpent, we may eat fruit from the trees in the garden, but God said, you must not eat from the fruit of the tree that's in the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it. Notice she adds something to God's word. God never said anything about not touching it. She adds that restriction, or you will die. The serpent responds, you will certainly not die. The serpent said to the woman, for God knows that when you eat it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing what? Good and evil. When the woman saw the fruit of the tree was good for food, pleasing to the eye, and catch this, and desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. She also gave some to her husband, who was, notice, with her. I love that the narrative that is told about Adam and Eve is that Adam was somewhere off and about, and all of a sudden she's like, hey, you want a fruit? Oh, good. Unknowing. He's watching her have all of this unfold. There she is. He knows what God has said too, and he's not taking his responsibility of protecting the garden and protecting his wife. He's allowing her to be tempted by the serpent. Another tangent. But that's always something that's interesting. It says, and then the eyes of both of them were open, and they realized they were naked. Shame breaks into God's world. And so they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. Here we see at the real heart, at the bottom of wisdom, and what fights against us gaining wisdom is this: we want to define good and evil for ourselves. The serpent was smart, even wise, but he used his wisdom to bring evil and chaos into God's good world, by slowly twisting the words of God and by enticing Eve into partaking of that tree. And the choice that lies before us is this: will we continue to be wise in our own eyes, or begin to fear God and unlock his wisdom and live the lives God is calling us to? This is the great struggle, isn't it? Is wanting to do things our own way. We see this manifested clearly in toddlers as they get older, right? You can't have candy for breakfast. That sounds preposterous. That sounds outlandish. What do you mean? It's delicious, it's sweet, it's awesome. Like, what do you, I have to eat eggs? Like, what is up with this, right? We see that manifested. They want to define good and evil for themselves. Now, they don't have this comprehensive understanding of cavities and bodily functions and health and all that stuff and what all those kind of high fructose corn syrup will do to, we're thinking about all those different things, but the kids just like, candy, good, vegetables, bad. Like, what are you talking about, right? And that's a simplistic understanding. But we do the same exact thing. We like to view all of our life through our lens and how we perceive things and not how God says they actually are. It's how I feel. It's how I think. But let me ask you one simple question. Have you been wrong before? Have you thought something was some way and it actually wasn't? How did you feel when you found out the truth? Dumbfounded? A little embarrassed? You thought you were doing the right thing in the right way and letting them know, and you find out when the truth comes out, oh, you were actually wrong this whole time. To go back to that analogy, it's when I'm convinced that there's an actor in this movie who's supposed to be in there, my wife Googles it, and I'm wrong. And I'm like, it must have been another movie, or whatever it is, right? Because we suddenly realize that even though in my mind I was convinced, there was nothing else convincing me of any other truth, I was wrong. And our ability to be wrong, just by the way that we perceive things, makes us unreliable to determine good from evil. Right? Anytime we sin, we rebel against God, we're saying, I'm saying what's good for me, not you. And that is the struggle. Right? A silly example. You're at work. Your coworker brought this amazing sandwich for lunch. It looks good to you, right? So you think in your mind, turkey sandwich sounds bomb. I didn't bring my lunch today. I'm super hungry. You grub it down, right? It seemed good to you in your own. How does your coworker feel about that, right? Though it was delicious to the taste and was good for you or whatever it was, right? You have just thrown them under the bus. They are now without a lunch, right? Because you wanted just to go and take what you thought was yours. Just because we perceive it to be good doesn't mean it actually is. We need someone who is outside of the broken system of the world we live in to declare what is good and what is not, because we are broken. It doesn't feel good to us to apologize for things that we've done wrong. It doesn't feel good to say, I was wrong, I made a mistake. It doesn't feel good to the book. You want to dig in your heels and say, well, let me tell you all the areas you've been wrong before in the past. And let's see, that's how we are as human beings, broken. And so we need someone with wisdom to tell us what is actually good and what is not. And this is the idea that James is examining here in this passage. Look how he begins. He says this, who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in humility that comes from wisdom. I've said this before. James does not function as like a nurturing, caring, like, hey, bud, you got this. He's more of like a coach. He's going to be in your face. He's going to not pull any punches. He's going to be honest with you, right? And that's important. And a good coach is honest. If you're having a terrible game, you're missing every shot that you've took, right? You've had 0 hits at bat. The coach is not going to be like, great job today, buddy. You really did it. He's like, hey, man. Hey, we got to work on something because something ain't right. We're not doing a good job here, right? If you're a boxer in a fight and you've lost 11 out of 12 rounds, a good coach is going to tell you, hey, bud, we're real close. You're almost on this one. He's going to say, last round, everything you got or you're losing this fight, right? That's what a good coach does. He's honest. And this is how James is. And remember, James is writing to a community here, and he's specifically dealing with teachers, teachers of the law, people who are proclaiming the scriptures, leaders and things of that nature. And what's easy to happen is that as you've journeyed further down in your relationship with God, it's easy to perceive yourself as wise or more knowledgeable and be puffed up with pride. And so James is like, hey, some of you think you're wise. Some of you think you're super understanding because you're real smart, you know the Greek, you know the Hebrew, you can do all this kind of, verbal jujitsu to get your point across. He says, you want to tell you who's wise? Let me see it in your life. That's real wisdom. Let me see this lived out. He says, by deeds done in humility that comes from wisdom. James is clearly saying, you want to know who's wise? Look at their life. Their life will be marked by wisdom. Their life was first marked by goodness. He says, show up by their good life. Now, this does not mean that their life is good in the sense that nothing bad happens, but that they live their life in accordance to the teachings of Jesus, i.e. the Sermon on the Mount. They are representatives of Psalm 1, which says this, blessed is the one who does not walk in the step of the wicked, or stand in the way of sinners, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers, but whose delight is the law of the Lord, who meditates on his law day and night. That person is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prospers. Not so the wicked. They are like the chaff that the wind blows away. Therefore, the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked leads to destruction. So the first thing it says is their life is marked by goodness. Goodness as God defines it, in accordance with his word, by bearing fruit, a life lived, walking in the wisdom of God. The next thing he says here is that it's done, and it's manifested through deeds done in humility, born out of wisdom. That everything this person does is born out of a humble heart posture. I love what Mark Sayre says. He says this, wisdom calls us to a vision of the good life. Ready? That we are not in control of. What we want for the good life is what we want for it, right? Our vision of the good life is how we perceive the good life, not necessarily what God says is the good life. Wisdom teaches us that this experience that we are having, this life that we live, does not revolve around me. It's not about me. I'm a part of a people, an ecosystem of life, and that what I do and how I live really matters and affects the people around me. Somebody who is wise is humble to that reality. They do not think the world just revolves around them. They understand themselves as a part of this ecosystem of life. And the antithesis of humility is what? Pride. And of pride, C.S. Lewis says this, for pride is a spiritual cancer. It eats up the very possibility of love or contentment or even common sense. And I think that quote is so profound that when we are not humble enough to realize that this whole thing doesn't revolve around us, we reap destruction on the world around us. It sucks out any possibility of love, seeking the good of another, contentment, finding any sort of joy or goodness in the life that you have, or even common sense to understand how your actions and your words affect the people around you. James goes on to say, but if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. James is telling us here clearly that there's two different types of wisdom. We see the second wisdom being displayed in the serpent as he was wise and cunning and deceived Adam and Eve into partaking of the tree. We are taught that there's a false wisdom and a real wisdom. Proverbs say this, there is a way that appears to be right, but in the end leads to what? Death. There's a way that we think about things that may be right to ourselves, but ultimately leads to death. Wisdom is about surrendering the idea that I know what is best and instead allowing God and his word to form the way that I look at things. And this was the teachings of Jesus, teaching us to see the right way about things. Jesus tells us that everyone who is perceived to be weak and forgotten are the ones who are actually blessed. Jesus says that instead of us hating our enemies, we're supposed to love them, and not like an ethereal, love you, brother, but in a tangible, real way, seeking their good, and to pray for them. And not pray their Lord that their car break down this week in Jesus' name, but praying sincerely for God's favor and blessing over their life. Jesus says that for us, when we give, we're to do it quietly and sincerely, not giving so that we get anything in return. And that is counter opposite to the world. It's to give so that everybody sees, look how generous we're being. Look how much I'm giving away, or any little thing. It's, oh, I got it. Don't worry. You get me next time, or whatever it is, right? Because we want generosity that reciprocates back. And Jesus says, when we give quietly. He says, don't let your left hand know what your right hand doing. Obscurity and quietness. And on are the teachings of Jesus to how we see our lives and to live them differently. Now, there are times where it feels like the wisdom of the world prevails and the way of the kingdom does not, right? You try and do the right thing. You live in accordance with God's words, and it feels like it backfires. Like I did the right thing, I said the right thing, I was in the right place, and somehow it still didn't work out for me. And you see those who are doing it the wrong way prosper, right? Let's say you were up for a promotion at work, and they asked you honestly about a part of education, if you knew about some sort of system. You have an opportunity there. I can be honest and say, actually, I don't know, but I'm eager to learn, I'm excited. Or you know that they're not actually going to test you for it. It's not actually part of the job, so you can just lie about it, but you choose to be honest. But the guy next to you, he lied. Oh yeah, I'm a pro, I got it. And he gets the promotion. How are you feeling? Like, come on, God. Like, I did the right thing, dude. I was honest, and it didn't work out. And this is why I love the Psalms. You want to know why? Because they're filled with prayers like these. Lord, come on, where were you? I did the right thing. I think about David's prayer, right? As he was faithfully trying to be a good king and serve God. And his son's after him, and he's trying to kill him. And he's like, God, what's going on? I'm doing the right things. My own son wants to kill me. I'm kicked out of the palace. I'm living out here in the wilderness. Where are you? What are you doing? Because in a broken system, it sometimes seems that evil prevails. But brothers and sisters, this is not the case. Psalm 37 says this, be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. Check this out. Do not fret or worry when people succeed in their ways, when they carry out their wicked schemes. Refrain from anger and turn from wrath. Do not fret or worry. It leads only to evil. For those who are evil will be destroyed, but those who hope in the Lord will inherit the land. That ultimately, when all the dust settles, those who honor God, God honors them. Those who submit themselves to God, He raises up. And so you do the right thing and it backfired. You were honest and the other person got the promotion. You gave with generosity, and people you know who spend their money spend it on themselves, and you feel like this thing is backwards. Shouldn't I be getting some more? But listen, do not grow weary. When the dust settles, you will see that those who live and according to God's wisdom live full lives, free from the entanglements of this world. Mark Sayers says this, when we sacrifice wisdom, we sacrifice the future on the altar of the present. A key image for how we can understand about wisdom is always thinking about what's ahead, not what's right before our face. So many conversations with me with young people is they have a hard time seeing down the road. They can only see what's right here, right now before their eyes. They've been at a company a short time and they're thinking, man, my friend's making more money, or this is happening, all these different options down the road. But they have this inability to see what doing the right thing over a long period of time builds. Everybody's looking always for the quick way out, the shortcut, right? We get these things all the time. Do you want to make $6,000 a week working from home? You hear those advertisements and it's like, dude, literally, if that was a reality, nobody would be in the workforce and everybody would be working for you. You wouldn't be running advertisements on the radio, right? It's like there's always this get-rich-quick scheme, or there's always this way to, but you want to know how you build wealth in your life? Slowly and surely over the long time, making right decisions about money. It's not, you're going to get this new idea, invention, and get on it. For some people, that happens, but those are miracles, really, right? But that's not the way we get to it, but that's wisdom in reality. Wisdom is taking the long way. It's taking the way there's no shortcuts. It's doing things the right way, and over time, it pays dividends. But so often, we forsake wisdom when we want instant gratification right here, right now. We see this on infomercials all the time. Do you want to lose 50 pounds in 1 week? This one pill will do that. If you're losing 50 pounds in 1 week on one pill, you're dying, right? That's really what's happening, right? You want to know how to lose weight? Eat less than you burn, right? And work out. That's it. For all the history of time, there's no nutrigenics and the super slim body wrap and all. It's just the simple, basic things of life. But it's the hard stuff that nobody wants to do. And it's the hard stuff that is wisdom. But everybody wants to take the shortcut. And we sacrifice wisdom when we want the instant gratification of the here and now and not seeing forward into the future. Brothers and sisters, let us not be short-sighted. We can trust him. He's been trustworthy all this time. We can still trust him. James says this. The first thing, this first telltale sign that you're not living in accordance with God's wisdom is harboring bitter envy. A good word translation for that is the idea of jealousy. That when you live in accordance to the world's vision of wisdom, it is a dog-eat-dog world, and everyone becomes a threat. I want you to imagine this as an incredibly jealous partner, somebody that you're with, right? They're incredibly jealous over you, that anything that you do, you say, or whatever, who's that? Why are they talking to you? Where have they been? How come they're, it's like, all right, dude, chill, relax. I was just getting a taco. This dude wanted a taco too. We're at the same stand, right? Nothing was happening. This person tries to control and manipulate and coerce every single thing to have their desired outcome because everything for them is a comparison and a competition, this jealous partner. And this comes alive inside of us when we're living to the accordance with the world's wisdom. That everybody always has better or more or whatever, and we're always chasing after. We're always comparing our lives to them, and we're always in competition with one another, trying to one-up each other's stories or trying to make ourselves look better or whatever, buff up our resume. We feel that there's this competition. But somebody who walks in wisdom is secure, not having to prove themselves to anyone because they know they answer to God and him alone. The next thing he says is that they harbor selfish ambition. And I want to be clear, ambition can be a good thing, and often it can be from God. It's this desire to want to do something well. There's good ambition. Paul says for us that when we run the race of faith, we run to win the race, not to participate, not just because we want to run well, and that is good, godly ambition. But there's something else that's counter to that, that's selfish ambition, where ambition turns inward on itself, and that's where we run into issues. And this is a prevalent doctrine in the world of self-help that teaches about selfish ambition. It's about you. It's about empowering you. It's all about you and you and you and you. And that's selfishness. There's no value in selfish ambition because you're running over other people for you to get there. You most often find about these people that they are alone, unreliable, and intolerable. People who are so consumed within their selfish ambition are first and foremost alone. Why? Because they push everybody away by the way that they live their lives. When they're only concerned about themselves, they push everybody else away. And whenever people call them on their junk, they play the martyr. You don't understand me. You don't get my grind, da-da-da-da-da, whatever. But in reality, they've been pushing people away with the way that they're living their life, not heeding the words of the people who love them enough to confront them in their brokenness. The second is that they're unreliable, because if they're only ever making decisions for themselves, they're never going to consider you, how you feel, what's happening in your world. They're not going to show up when you need them because they're so consumed with themselves. And lastly is they're intolerable. People just ultimately don't want to be around these people because of the way that they live their lives. And I think a modern day parable for that is the life of someone like Steve Jobs. And not to speak ill of him at all, but if you've seen any of his biography, the autobiographies and stuff that have come up about him, he was successful by the world's metrics. He built Apple computers up to this multi-million-dollar company. But what did he do to get there? He crushed his friends. He crushed his family. He ruined relationships in his life. And yes, he was successful. And there's no doubt, Apple's everywhere, right? There's no doubt he was successful, but at what cost? Jesus says, what does it gain a person to gain the whole world and do what? Lose their soul. You know what Jobs says at the end of his life? He said, I wish I would have been there for my kids more. I realize now that I didn't have the relationship I wanted with them. But he built something big. He built something beautiful, but at what cost? James says for us not to deny or to boast about that kind of wisdom. James is saying, do not boast or deny the reality that that kind of wisdom is not real wisdom. He says that kind of wisdom is demonic. He says that way of thinking, selfish ambition, turn inward on ourselves. He says that's not wisdom, that's demonic thinking. That's coming straight from the pit of hell. And I know too many followers of Jesus who are under the teaching and instruction of demonic wisdom, and that is destroying their life. That they follow the way that the world is teaching them, but they just sprinkle a little bit of Jesus on top, making it sound spiritual, but are actually undoing their life with the way that they are living. And brothers and sisters, that kind of wisdom only leads to disorder and brokenness, which is how James finishes that verse there. He says this, "For when you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice." So the fruit of that kind of demonic wisdom is straight up disorder. When someone lives their life according to that way of living, their lives are in disorder, and it takes them farther than they ever wanted to go. Millions of people sacrifice the life that God is wanting them to live for the pursuit of the vision of the world's good life, and it never pays off. With that being said, I want to have a word to the young people in our church. One of the biggest areas of struggle with youth is thinking you know it all. When you're young, you think you know everything about the world. You think, oh, my parents, they never understood, right? I think about, early on when you're young and you see parents with kids at a store and the kids screaming, you're like, my kids are never going to scream, right? Or you see people's marriage and you see them bickering in line. Babe, we're never going to fight like that. Or, whatever it is, right? We will never be those kind of people. And people in here are laughing. Why? Because we know when rubber meets the road, you're the person with the screaming kid. Please, Lord, let them be quiet, Or you're the one bickering in there. Well, you didn't put the trash liner in right, or whatever it is. You're that couple. You become that reality. Because you think you know it all. You think, oh, I have that all figured out. It's not that hard, really. It's not. And then real life happens, and you realize, oh, snap. I was wrong, right? You've been in the world for any amount of time, in the real world, not in your parents' house, under the covering of their financial blessing and their wisdom, but out on your own, for real. And you're like, wait, everything's expensive. Why does everything cost so much money, A bag of Cheetos is $4, It's like you begin to think about these different things, but you've been under this protection and covering. And so we're the young people, you don't know it all. The most valuable thing I can tell you is don't ever think that you know it all. Be humble enough to listen. Now, for the older folks that are like, you tell those young people. Older folks, just because you've lived more life doesn't mean you're more wise. That's important to understand. You can know a 75-year-old who still acts 16 with the way that they lead their lives. Maturity isn't always correlated to age, right? And so older generations can also learn from younger generations. Receive from those who are younger beneath them, because God's wisdom is on those individuals' lives. The pursuit for any generation is wisdom. That's the end goal. However we get it is good. And so that word to young people, be quiet and listen. The best thing you could learn to do in your life is learn to ask questions. How do you do that? Why do you do that? Why is this important to you? How do you do this? How do you do that? And learn everything you possibly can, and your life will be so much more rich because of it. When you come in with the humility saying, I don't know everything, you find out how much you learn. One of the most interesting things to me as a pastor is if you would ask me, as I was like a youth leader leading ministry 4 or 5 years ago, like, how confident are you that you know? Like, I'll be like, dude, I know what's in the Word. I know ministry and stuff. You ask me now, and I'm like, I don't got a clue. It's like, I'm not too sure, to be honest with you, because the deeper you go in, the more mystery you find that there is. The more that you examine your life and walk further down into wisdom, the more you realize that God is not black and white and clear and cut, that He's a powerful, majestic, mighty being who reveals Himself in a multitude of ways. And so it takes you, the deeper into faith you go, the deeper into mystery you go. But James concludes the letter in verse 17 and 18. He says this, but the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Peacemakers who sow in peace will reap a harvest of righteousness. And we'll come back to verse 18. But the first thing that he says that wisdom is wisdom is pure, which means free from the entanglements of sin and deception. Godly wisdom, wisdom that's from above, is pure. If someone's advice to you, if someone's wisdom to you is to rebel against God and to sin, it is not wisdom. To take a shortcut, to get the easy way, that's not wisdom. The next thing James says about wisdom is that it's peace-loving. That wisdom desires peace, not turmoil, not fighting, not turning in on one another, but peace. It says the next of wisdom is that it's considerate, which means to think deeply about how it affects the lives of others. Wisdom is well thought out. It's not quick, rash decisions. It's sitting, marinating, thinking about things, thinking about all the options and how all these things interplay. Next thing about wisdom is it says it's submissive, which means willing to change, not stubborn or unreasonable. You want to know somebody who's wise? They listen well. It doesn't mean that they agree with everything that's being said, but it means they have the humility to hear somebody out. A wise person considers all things and weighs them in their heart. But they first have the humility to consider. Somebody I know is not wise is somebody who's unwilling to hear somebody else's point of view, somebody else's story, somebody else's background, somebody else's way of thinking. That is somebody who is unwise. They are caught and stubborn in their own ways. The next thing about wisdom is that it's full of mercy and good fruit. That the purpose of wisdom is to be merciful and to bear good fruit as Jesus determines good fruit. It says of wisdom that it's impartial, which means unwavering and without prejudice. That wisdom really considers the matter at hand thoroughly and is not dragged and torn by biases and the different things, but considers the matter without prejudging. And lastly, that wisdom is sincere. That there's no pretense or ulterior motive, that wisdom is truly sincere. And he concludes his passage by saying, "Peacemakers who sow in peace will reap a harvest of righteousness." The truly wise are those who are able to make peace. And when they sow peace, they reap righteousness, which means right relationship with ourselves and others. I'm going to ask Joey to come up, and we're going to close now. But this is with the final word. I've titled today's message, Embodied Wisdom. Because, brothers and sisters, this is what we need now more than ever. Every single day and every single space, conversations are taking place. There are ideologies at war between what is good and what is evil, what is right, what is wrong, what's the way forward. And followers of Jesus candidly have struggled in the West, in America, to take the posture of humility. Often, and more often than most, we take the position of arrogance. We shout, we scream, we slam our fists, we type in all caps, right? We take the position of arrogance. That's not wisdom. Wisdom is embodied. It's not shouted from the corners. It's not tweeted from a desktop. It's embodied. It's flesh and blood. It's here and now. That's how wisdom is imparted onto somebody else. And what we need now as followers of Jesus is for the church to embody wisdom to the world. Everybody who's lived life for any amount of time knows that the wisdom of the world does not work. Sure, it may give short-term success, but it breeds long-term disaster. What people want at the end of the day is not a white picket fence, 2-car garage, house with 3 kids. They want peace. They want joy. They want security. They want to know God. And you can't find that anywhere in the world's teaching. And guess who's been given the responsibility to bear that to the world? You. Me. And so as followers of Jesus, our call is to embody wisdom to a hurting world. To show people there's a different way. That when somebody is working against me, that somebody wills ill towards me, that my response isn't to get back and get him back better, but is in turn in wisdom to love my enemy and make them a friend. The call of Jesus is for us to not view people as obstacles in the way of getting to our goals, but actually valued creation, made in God's image, that God wants me to partner with in making his world a better place and to making this place more like the kingdom of God. Wisdom unlocks that potential. Wisdom teaches us that it is truly better to give than to receive. That you could store up for yourself all these treasures where Jesus says where moth and rust can destroy. But a life that's lived wisely is one that is lived in generosity. Because do you want to die with $2 million in your bank account, or do you want to die having made a difference in this world? That is wisdom. And as a church, we need to embody it. Not shout it, not scream it, but as James says, live it. We have too many people talking. We got too few people doing. We got too few people living. We got too few people raising up generations to follow in this way of wisdom. And brothers and sisters, we need this now. And so my urge to you, my call to you is for us to become people who embody wisdom, and by doing so, sow peace into our world, reaping right relationship. How would our city change if we stopped saying, I decide what's good and what's not good, and we started humbly living out what God says is good? What could happen? What could be of this place? What could be of your life? The possibilities are endless. But today before you stands a choice. Will you take from the tree of life, who is Jesus, embody the tree of life, receive his wisdom and walk in accordance with his teachings? Or will you listen to the lie of the serpent who brings you in saying, you know better. God's just holding out on you. Take of the fruit. Do what you want. And reap ultimately destruction in our life. As the proverb said, there's a way that seems right to a man, but in the end leads to death. As Moses said in Deuteronomy, by way of the Lord, today I set before you two choices, life and death. Therefore, choose life. Jesus, thank you for this time. Thank you for your word. Thank you for this moment.
Thank you, Zion City family, for joining with us watching online. We are so happy that you were able to. Make sure to send that link to all your friends, family, and loved ones, someone that you think would love to hear this message. We do believe that God is speaking to the city through this sermon. And we'll see you next time.